Do you have a presentation to share?
I do. I'm going to share my screen and just give me a thumbs up when you can see it.
Looks good to me.
Okay, great. And thanks so much, everybody, for inviting me to join. Really a pleasure to be here. I'm calling in from Chicago, so I think it's probably similarly very cold to where you all are in Ontario. And so I'll talk a little bit about the organization, but I think that listening to a bit of Ken's presentation, we're going to kind of take it a level up to the global within my presentation on what cities are doing to address climate change and speak to, I think, some of the strategies and theories that Ken was mentioning in his presentation. So first, I wanted to just start out by who we are as an organization. So C40 is a membership of mayors from the world's largest cities who are working together to tackle climate change. And so within Canada, we work with Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, but really a lot of our objective is to utilize the work that is happening globally to inspire others, to inspire cities and municipalities of all sizes, to pressure national governments and other levels of governments to do more to address climate change. And by really kind of taking the examples that are used in cities from around the world, that we can do that and accelerate action. And so as you can see, we are a very global organization. Half of our membership is in the global South, half is in the global North. And we really work to connect not only mayors from across the world, but also city practitioners to share best practices on technical examples that have worked, but again, inspire, use political platforms to really get mayors more engaged. And I'll talk a little bit about kind of how we do that and use our collective power of mayors to really partner at the global, local, and regional level to really advance action on the ground. So, I can touch on this, but just kind of putting in context of what is the objective. This is likely not new for many of you here, but I think it is good scene setting on what the targets are. So the Paris Agreement from 2015 really outlined a pathway where we need to go to achieve 1.5 degrees. I think the pledges now after COP26 are actually a little bit better, but we're still not in a great place. And so action needs to happen fast. It needs to happen at scale. And I think we have kind of a lot of the large scale solutions, and really it's about working at the very local level with communities and a coalition of stakeholders to make those happen. So one kind of global campaign that I wanted to touch on, because it really does speak to cities of all sizes around the world coming together to say, we are committed to this. We are committed to looking at science, setting targets based on that, and then really implementing inclusive climate actions at the local level that are going to change the way that we live for the better, right? To create more healthy, resilient communities. And so this campaign is called the Cities Race to Zero. And it's an official partner of COP and of the United Nations. And it's really a mechanism for cities to engage and commit to the levels of targets that we're asking national governments to. This is really the first time that cities have had an avenue to participate formally in the international processes on climate change negotiations. And so really, and there's different tracks of it. So really what it is trying to do is rally cities. There's a track on regions, businesses, and investors to say, we are committed to science-based targets, which is what the Paris Agreement looks at. So based on what science says we need to reduce emissions, we're really committed to reaching those targets. And again, achieving net zero emissions by at least 2050 at the very latest. And for Cities Race to Zero, then it's about committing to implementing inclusive climate actions at the local level that are going to help address that. So again, I think a lot of the examples that were just touched on, and I'll touch on a few more of the way that C40 is working to do this, but a commitment at the political level to really put those into action. And I think as we all work with or in municipal government, knowing that the importance of getting political support to really put money and resources to the advancement of action locally is critical. So here's just kind of a list. So for COP26, which happened in Glasgow last November, for those who don't know, COP is the Conference of Parties, the international negotiation space for national governments. Again, this was kind of the first time that cities had a formal role as part of that. C40, along with partners, were able to mobilize over 1,000 cities who committed to this target. And many kind of said this was the strongest and the most productive thing that was brought to COP, was really showing this strong commitment from cities from around the world to meet the targets when national governments really didn't step up. You can see the 26 cities in Canada that are currently signed on. We're obviously looking to engage with more and support on implementing, the actions in it. But you can go to citiesracetozero.org if you want to learn more. But I think we started out at the beginning of 2021 with, I think, 3 cities signed on, and so really, really pleased to see the 26 that have stepped up. As part of this too, and this is kind of work that we do, is really providing platforms for mayors on the global stage to talk about what they're doing, to not only give them more political inspiration, but also be able to showcase those examples that were just talked about on a global stage to inspire others to do this around the world. This is the mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, who for the first time was in the UNFCCC invited a mayor to speak in front of the national leaders about what was happening in cities. And this was him speaking at that event. And so really kind of trying to put pressure on national governments to say, this stuff is happening at the local level, you need to do it too. And you need to see us as critical partners in doing this work. There was also really, I think not as applicable for our region, but very applicable for the global fight around climate change, is a call to really increase financing, particularly to global South countries, especially for adaptation, as they are not the ones that generally created the problem that we're in, but the ones that are feeling the most impacts of it. And then a lot of our messaging, and I'll touch a little bit on this next, is really around delivering a green and just recovery from COVID-19. For us, this is really, really critical. And, COVID recovery does mean climate action. And we've been able to do kind of a lot of research that says if we invest in the things that we need to at the local economy and our local level that are supporting climate action, it's going to help us recover economically and from a health perspective from the pandemic, but also help us address our goals. And from the other side, if we don't, we're going to create it worse on both ends. We're going to create a less healthy society and less protect ourselves and address climate change. And so in 2020, C40 created a mayoral task force that had mayors from around the world, really came together that said, what does a green and just recovery look like? What should we be calling for? And really showed that if we invest in these sustainable solutions at the local level, we can create 50 million jobs. So really, this is an economic driver. If we look at this, we can reduce air pollution by almost 30%, which is so critical in so many of our cities. We can have savings in health costs from improved mobility options and air quality. And we can more than halve greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 by really investing in these solutions. And so for us, there is the COVID recovery and climate change are not separate things. They are incredibly linked at this point, and our advocacy really at all levels is to help ensure that. I wanted to touch on 2 kind of quick examples, and I know that the 15-minute city was already touched on at kind of some local levels of what's happening in Canada, which is so incredibly exciting. But I just want to mention that this is really kind of, this concept is taking off around the world, right? Not only are we all home more and need to rely on our local communities more, but really this is also going to help us address so many of our climate objectives. And so C40 is working with kind of a cohort of cities around the world to help figure out, what does this 15-minute concept look like in their city? How are they working on community engagement structures that are really bringing together those coalitions that were just talked about and share best practice examples on it? Some are about hard infrastructure and new development. Some are about soft and social infrastructure. And all of that is really critical right now for cities to understand what is happening in Barcelona. Many of you probably are following the Superblocks program that is really about redesigning the way that streets are used in the city. It's more tactical urbanism than it is kind of new development, but it's been hugely impactful in the city. Portland has kind of some really amazing objectives, and they already have kind of the highest cycling rate in the United States, at least. But they really kind of have done a lot of interesting data analysis to understand what services are available currently, what services are not available, looking at a 15-minute scale, and doing a bit of that data analysis around the city to ensure that there's an equitable distribution of a 15-minute concept across the city, and that they can really be directed in where they are putting resources. And so we're trying to provide a platform for cities to really share those experiences and best practices, and would love to kind of pull some of the ones that have been talked about today even. Another kind of global campaign that we've done at C40 is really bringing together the International Transit Unions Federation. So these are the unions that represent transit workers. COVID has obviously taken a huge hit on public transportation, and there is really a need to showcase globally and at the national level how important it is to invest in our public transportation, and how our transportation workers are essential workers. They are taking people to their jobs every day, and is really critical. And so we banded together with this International Union Federation to kind of create a global campaign on this that was highlighting what was happening in cities to really help ensure that public transportation is protected, even if ridership is lower, but those who are riding are critical. And so we did some research that really showed that investment in public transportation can create around 4.6 million additional jobs, reduce air pollution from emissions, and protect tens of millions of workers in these service sector jobs. Some examples, the new mayor of Boston, Mayor Wu, has just made 3 of the bus lines in Boston free, that are particularly bus lines that are ridden by low-income workers in the city of Boston. And she's used recovery from funds from the US government to fund that. And so this is really kind of a direct connection between COVID recovery and climate action, and really ensuring an equity, ensuring that people who need to ride the bus can continue to ride the bus, that public transportation is continued to be invested in this way, and that we're really coming out of the pandemic and using the stimulus funding to do that. And so this is something we want to continue to kind of engage and elevate and showcase how important investment in public transportation is. I will pause there. That was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, again, kind of taking us up a level than the last presentation, but I hope that you all learned something, and happy to answer a few questions.
Thank you so much, Laura. We're actually behind on time, so we don't have a chance to ask questions, but yeah, this is a wonderful presentation.